If you have your Bibles, I hope that you do. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 28. If you don't have your Bibles, you can flip over the back of the bulletin, and in just a moment, we're going to look at a section of Scripture there in Matthew 28. Every January, I have a book that I go back and review. I don't reread the whole thing, but I look back over the places that I've underlined, the concepts that are there. The book is called The One Thing. It's written by Gary Keller of Keller Williams fame. And so Gary Keller was a real estate mogul, and as he was leading all these real estate agents, he figured out that the most important thing in being a real estate agent is to have leads, is to make sure that you have people that want to sell their houses, and you have people who are wanting to buy houses. And so as he began to build his kind of empire, he made sure that every agent that worked for him carved out 2 hours a day, the same 2 hours every single day, no questions asked, Monday through Friday, from 10 to 12, all these agents were allowed to do were to work the phones in order to work leads, to find new houses to sell, to maybe find some other people who are interested in buying. And he figured out that from the real estate industry, as long as you have those things going on, everything else will either take care of itself or be totally unnecessary. And so for a real estate agent, he said, this is the one thing that we do. We find leads. We find houses that want to be sold. We find people that want to buy houses. And then whenever you do that enough, you'll begin to fit the people together and everything will take care of itself. Well, as people begin to look at Keller Williams and what Gary Keller began to build, they begin to figure out, can we apply these principles into other areas? And it led him to writing the book called The One Thing. And in The One Thing, he says that in every industry, in every work, in every life, there is one thing that if you will focus on that one thing, if by doing it, all other things will become either easy or unnecessary. And so in your industry, if you can find your one thing. So for a real estate agent, it was leads. For a college football coach, it in all likelihood is recruiting. For a writer, it is simply writing a certain number of words every single day. And so if you want to write a book, if you write one word a day, every single day for the rest of your life, if God gives you enough life, you'll have a book. For me, it's 750 to 800 words, 5 days a week. 800 words, 5 days a week, Sunday through Thursday. If I write those words, then books will be written. If I don't write those words, it's not going to happen. Everything else, the contracts, everything else will take care of itself. That's the one thing I have to focus in on. Do you know that churches and Christians have one thing? One thing, that in so doing it, everything else will either become easy or unnecessary. And that one thing is found in Matthew chapter 28. And so in Matthew 28, Jesus has been born, he's lived his life, he's suffered, he's been persecuted, he's died, he's now been raised from the dead, he's made these appearances, and in the very closing words of Matthew chapter 28, we see the last words that Jesus is now going to speak to his disciples before he ascends back up into heaven. And let's pick up these words starting in verse number 16. Now notice that, the 11. Now the 11 disciples, something happened to one of them. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. I love that. After the resurrection, after everything, you would think that these guys would be on fire, and they were, but they still had this doubt. They still had this uncertainty. If you think today that you are in a place in which every single person in this room believes 100% and there's no question, and you're the only one that doubts, you're wrong. Because even here the disciples were not really sure. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Verse 18. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. If I had to narrow down what I believe is probably the biggest misconception about Christianity, in the odd geographic location in which we live, I would say the greatest misunderstanding is that a majority of the people that are in this room and a majority of the people that we interact with on a regular basis believes that Christianity is a personal preference. It's a personal preference. And so for me, today, I've chosen to wear my fancy pants, right? Went to the Dillard sale, right? So I've chosen to wear my fancy pants. I wear my hair short. partially my choice, partially God's choice. It's changing as we're going along. I'm a Razorback fan and a Cowboy fan, and I'm a Christian. And so if you want to wear your hair longer and wear jorts and cheer for Oklahoma State and the Raiders and be an atheist, that's your choice. I mean, not that all those go together. The thinking might, but they're just personal preferences. It's no big deal. There's no ethically or morally acceptable thing to cheer for Arkansas over somebody else, right? It's just a personal preference based on where you grew up, based on your history, based on kind of what you wanted to do. It's just a personal preference. And many people see faith that way. Hair length is that way. The clothes you wear is that way. The college team you choose for is that way. The pro team you choose for is that way. But faith is not that way. Faith is not just a personal preference. Think about this. The agnostic says there is no God. No, I'm sorry, the atheist says that. I'm changing religions. The agnostic says that there is a God, but we can't know him. The agnostic says there is a God, but we can't know him. Christianity says there is a God and he has made himself known to us. Both of those can't be true. Either one is true or one is false, or both can be false, but they cannot both be true. The atheist says there is no God. Therefore, there's no point. There's no purpose. We're in charge of ourselves. Christianity says there is a God. Therefore, we are now indebted to him. Both of those things can't be true. Islam says that there is a God, and we must do everything in our power to do the best that we possibly can to make ourselves as good as we possibly can so that one day we can prove ourselves worthy of God's love. The Christian says that there is a God, and there is nothing that we could ever do to make ourselves right to God, and that yet he has lavished his love upon us, and we will be accepted into his heaven because of his tremendous grace for us. Both of those things cannot be true. Either one is right and the other is wrong, or they both are wrong, but they cannot both be right. And yet we live in a day in which people believe that faith is just a personal preference. If you want to be agnostic, if you want to be atheist, if you want to be Islam, if you want to be Mormon, if you want to be nothing, if you want to be a Christian, it's all the same. It's none of our business. You live whatever life you want to live, and everything will be great. Now, in part, that's true. In part, faith is a personal choice. And the great thing about living in the country in which we live, and the great thing about Christianity too, is that we allow people to make the choices they want to make. And so it's an American principle, first of all, that established in our very First Amendment that we have the right not just to worship how we want, we have the right to express, to live out our faith however we so choose. And as long as we are not greatly infringing upon the rights of others, we have to respect the rights of others to live out their faith. They get the freedom to do that. But even Christianity kind of has that principle. The young man comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to be saved?" And Jesus says, "Obey the 10 Commandments." And the guy arrogantly says, "I've already done that." Jesus, now knowing his heart, says, "Sell everything you own and give it to the poor and follow me." And the guy says, "I can't do that." And he walks away. And Jesus allows him to now walk in disobedience, to live a life that's now going to be separated from God, to have eternal consequences because of that. But Jesus respects his choice in the same way that Jesus will respect our choice if we choose to obey him or if we choose to disobey him. We live in a time in which people, both because of our country and because of our faith, where people have a right to live out their faith. And if somebody swearing into Congress wants to place their hand on the Book of Mormon or the Constitution or Quran, that's their business. And we as Christians support their right to do so. As a matter of fact, I would rather than put their hand on the Quran if that's a true reflection of who they are, than for them to put their hand on the Bible if they're just doing it for flash and show. That's their right. And we support that and allow them to do that. But we don't now buy into what society says, that there's really no difference between the Quran or the Bible, between the Book of Mormon or the Bible, or between some secular book and something else. We don't buy into this just a personal preference, and there's no lasting consequences of these things. The reality is they can't all be true. And while we prefer to buy into this idea of every religion is kind of true, intellectually that is impossible because different religions are proclaiming truths that are in contradiction to one another. And even either they're real or they're wrong. Either they're right or they're wrong. Christianity is not a personal preference. It's not like hairstyle or clothing or geographical preference or where you live, and so we kind of talk like this. Christianity is about a way of life. It's about the origins of who we are and this world. It's about where we're going. It's about what we're supposed to do and what our responsibilities actually are. It's about a pathway to be in a relationship with the one who created us. It's about finding meaning and value in life and significance and satisfaction. Christianity is much more than a personal preference. And because it's much more than a personal preference, there's an expectation now upon us to live out our faith. Now, there's an interesting aspect. There's two kind of byproducts of everybody believing that faith is a personal preference. And one of them is kind of beneficial, and the other one is not so much. And the first is this. The fact that everybody thinks that faith is a personal preference means that in all likelihood, you can go your entire life living in this geographic region. You can go your entire life living out your faith and never face any kickback because of it. Never face any real persecution. Maybe never even face anybody saying, do you really believe that? Is that really true? Do you really think that? Chances are there's none of you that were on your way to church this morning that your friends or your colleagues, your coworkers or people at a convenience store looked at you and said, really, you're going to church? On a beautiful day like this? I mean, your kids might have said this, but nobody is out there making fun of your faith. Because we live in a culture which it's seen as a personal preference. It's your right, and nobody's really going to judge you for it or think about it. As long as you kind of stay in your lane, we're going to live these pretty easy lives. Now, that's greatly contrasted with other places around this world in which people are being persecuted for living out the teachings of Jesus. We don't really face that here. And most of the examples that people give of Christians being persecuted in America are laughable. Generally speaking, we get to live our faith and nobody's going to give us any kickback. And it's kind of nice. I mean, we shouldn't dodge persecution, but we don't have to necessarily go seeking it out. And so it's kind of nice to be able to do whatever it is that we want to do and not have a lot of the negative consequences because of it. But as nobody confronts us in our faith, as nobody gives us any kickback, there's a second consequence to faith being generally seen as just a personal preference. And that is a majority of us will keep our faith private. We'll treat it like a personal preference. And so when it's kind of safe to reveal who we are, we might reveal who we are. But we know that there is a societal contract that says, I have to respect your faith and you have to respect my faith, and the way that we do that the best is by keeping it silent, by keeping it private. So as long as I keep my faith private and to me and just kind of express it in non-threatening ways, you're not going to say anything to me and I won't say anything to you whenever you do the same with your faith. But there's a problem with that. Jesus expects us to live our faith out loud, in public. I think for me the great illustration is our faith is in many ways much like a marriage. My marriage to Jenny is very personal. It's very private. There are aspects of that relationship that you aren't privy to in any way whatsoever. There are aspects of that relationship that I've made you privy to that she wished I wouldn't have made you privy to in many ways. But there's a private element to that. And yet I wear this wedding ring. I talk about her. This private relationship has a very public consequence. I wear this ring so that you know that I'm married, so you know that my behavior, my activity will be and should be different because of the commitments I've made to her. I wear this ring so that you will know to treat me differently because of the commitments that we have made to one another. In many ways, baptism, which we're going to see at the end of the service, baptism in many ways is the wedding ring of our faith. It is a public proclamation of the transformation that has taken place in our lives, and it is a public declaration of, I'm now going to live my life differently. Not perfect. I'm now going to live my life differently because of what has happened to me. Our faith has a very public element to it. And yet if we buy into the idea that faith is a personal preference, then we will keep it very quiet, only expressing it in the ways that are safe and free and in no way threatening to other people. And yet Jesus calls us to something radically different. He calls us to a faith that begins to impact others. And we cannot have a faith that impacts others unless our faith has a public component to it. Now be careful. Whenever I say that we're supposed to live very public lives as Christians, This does not mean that we're supposed to do everything in our power to project a persona that does not reflect our true hearts. That's what the Pharisees did. The Pharisees wanted to appear righteous, appear religious, appear faithful without having any transformation in their hearts whatsoever. And that happened with the Pharisees, and it happens with a lot of us as well. We think oftentimes we wrongly think that living a public faith means that I need to post Christian things on Facebook, I need to wear Christian t-shirts, I need to give the appearance, I need to let everybody know where I go to church and how I go to church, I need to carry a really big Bible so everybody will see it, when in reality the pages are pristine because they've never been looked at. That's not what it means to live a public faith. Public faith does not mean that we are now going to stand up for our rights and faith and be jerks to everybody else who disbelieves and treat everybody else poorly and treat our kind kindly, and that's what faith is going to look like. That's not Christianity. Living a public faith means that we are going to live by the teachings of Jesus no matter the responses of other people. And so why our culture will find it acceptable and even Christian to hate some people, we're not going to. We're going to love them. And we're actually going to have outward signs of expressions of love toward them, actually be associated with them in a way that might cause the judgment of our friends and our fellow church members and our family and this culture and society. Our faith is going to be so public that we're willing to love other people even when everybody else says we shouldn't love them. Now, our faith is going to be so public that we're going to be willing to talk about what God has done in our lives when other people get a little bit uncomfortable with it, when they aren't going to want to hear about it, when the societal contract says you don't go there. The societal contract says you don't look at the natural consequences of the choices that they are actually making. You don't call out the path that they're on. You don't in love speak truth to their life. The societal contract says you mind your own business. We're going to live a public faith in such a way that we're now willing to communicate, to use our words. The old line says that you and I should live such lives that we preach Jesus and use words if necessary. It's always necessary. The gospel of Jesus Christ is good news. Yes, we need to live our lives that model faith, but we can't just live our lives and hope other people understand that we love Jesus and hope that other people will come to know Jesus too. It is a message that is delivered. It is a story that is told, and that demands our words. If you never speak the words of Jesus to other people, you are not following Him. You're not being a disciple. This is what Jesus said. He had the ability now in these closing words to these disciples to say whatever it is that He wanted to say. And in these moments, He chose the moment to say, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. That got their attention. That means this is serious. What He's about to say is serious. What is it that He's about to say? He says, go and make disciples. Go. It kind of has a double meaning. Go. So go as in as you go. Meaning you're not going to stay here. I'm about to go up to heaven. You're going to stand here and linger for a little bit, then an angel's going to show up and scatter you. And as you're going, you need to be making disciples. So as we're going in life, as we're going at home, as we're going at work, as we're going to the ball fields, as we're going in play, as we're going to church, and wherever God takes us and wherever God puts us, we need to have the lens on, the mindset on, that we need to be looking for opportunities to make disciples. Disciples. This concept of an apprentice, this concept of a student, somebody who is learning to live life in this way. These 11 men had followed Jesus around, listened to Him teach, lived out, practiced what He said to teach. They were His followers. And Jesus says now, as you go about life, you need to be making more of you, making more of us, making people who now follow after Jesus. Not who just outwardly do the right things, but whose hearts are now being transformed in the likeness of who He is. So as you're going, make disciples. But go has a different meaning too. Not only is it just a casual as you go, it is also this concept of go with intention, go with purpose. Meaning now that our eyes have been opened by God's grace and we're following after him in faith, not only will we be making disciples at home and at work and in the stands and among friends as we casually go about life, it also means that we are intentionally going to go to some places, be in some places, intentionally position ourselves in certain places that the only reason we are there is because we want to make disciples. The only reason we are there is we've looked at it from a kingdom perspective, and Jesus needs to be made known in these places, and there's not a lot of light in these places, and so we are now going to strategically position ourselves in these places. Go and make disciples of all nations, not just of your neighborhood, not just of your family, but now in all nations, which means strategically as we look at this greater Fort Smith region, we need to go. As we go, as we're scattered about, we need to be making disciples, but then we need to strategically place ourselves, position ourselves, move some of our families, intentionally have lunch in certain places, build relationships in certain places where maybe Jesus is not as well known as he could be, and we need to specifically make him known in these places, but not just in the greater Fort Smith region. That means all the way around the world. We need to find locations in which Jesus is not known and strategically send people there, plant them there, pray for those places. As you go, make disciples of all nations. Now, what does that look like? What does it look like to make a disciple? Baptizing them. Baptizing them. We're about to see it in just a moment. Baptizing them. Now, in our culture, people tend to get baptized. It's okay, good. But in the day of Jesus, to get baptized, you are now identifying yourself with Jesus, and that came with a tremendous cost. It could cost you your family, your friends, your reputation, your life. And so while here, some people might get baptized just because it looks good sometimes, or just because they want to kind of make some things right. In the day of Jesus, if you got baptized, you meant it. It meant your eyes had been opened by God's grace. You had recognized your sin. You understood that there was nothing you could do about it. You heard the message of God's forgiveness into your life. You received it to cover your sin. And now you are promising to follow him in gratitude in whatever you might face, but just in gratitude for what he has done for you because of the great promise of heaven, having the burden of your sin lifted off. So as you and I are make disciples, what that means is that people are coming to faith to recognize, to realize what Jesus has done for them, to know their sin, to see what it is, to feel the helplessness of not being able to do anything about it, but then to receive the forgiveness of Jesus and the freedom that comes with it. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to do all that I have taught you. A disciple is not someone who just has this one-time experience with Jesus, gets baptized, and says, I'm in. But instead, we are now growing in the knowledge of who Jesus is, understanding what it is that he taught, living the life that he's taught us to live. We are learning and applying, learning and applying, learning and applying. And for those in this room who've been Christians for a long time, we can be the first ones to testify to you. This is not something you ever come to a completion point on. Instead, you are in a constant process of learning what Jesus taught, applying it to your life, learning what Jesus taught, applying it to your life. That's what it now means to be a disciple. Somebody who has been baptized, who has publicly proclaimed that I'm a follower of Jesus and is now in the process, theologically we would say the process of sanctification, the process now of having our lives transformed by who Jesus is. It's why we can continue to fail, continue to sin, in parts because we don't know what Jesus has taught. We don't know how to apply it to our lives. We're still broken people, but we are working on it. We are growing in the process of learning and applying what he has taught. So I want to ask you 4 questions today. Now, I want us to have kind of a spiritual checkup. You know, if I go to my dentist, they ask just a couple of questions just to figure out what is the condition of your teeth. How often are you brushing? How often are you flossing? And let's take some x-rays. So today I'm going to see how much you're brushing, how much you're flossing, and then I'm going to take some x-rays. Question number 1. Are you a follower of Jesus? Yes or no? Notice what I didn't say. I didn't say, are you a Christian? That's a fair question. But our culture and society defines Christian in such a unique way. Sometimes being a Christian could just mean, yeah, my mama believed, or my grandmother believed, or yeah, I vote Republican, or yeah, I grew up in the Bible Belt, or yeah, I'm an American. Sometimes that descriptor is not accurate. Now, notice what I also didn't say. Have you at any point in your life walked an aisle, said a prayer, been baptized? That's not my question. My question is, are you a follower of Jesus? Have you had your eyes opened by his grace? Have you recognized his sin, confessed your need now for him, and received his forgiveness in your life in such a way that is now impacting how you live and what you do? Yes or no? It's pretty simple. Yes or no? Are you in or are you out? Now, there's a good number of people in this room who would say no. And my hope is they would say, not yet. I'm not there yet. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm trying to understand. Maybe I grew up in a church that was teaching this, and what you're teaching is different than what they're teaching. I'm still trying to figure it out. Or maybe I grew up outside the church, and I'm not there yet. I don't want to make a false commitment. I'm not there yet. And if that's you, God love you. Thank you for being here. Keep on showing up. Keep on figuring out. Keep on exploring faith, discovering what it's all about. Keep on figuring out what Jesus is. Ask Jesus to reveal himself to you. And if he doesn't do it, then walk away and says, all right, he didn't do it. But ask him to. Ask him, Jesus, are you real or not? Show me. But yes or no? Are you in or are you out? And do you understand that is more than just a personal preference? I didn't ask you, are you going to root for the Cowboys or the Rams? I didn't ask that. It's all the same. One's going to win and the Cowboys are going to lose. I get that. But you can root for whoever you want to root for. What I'm asking there, are you a follower of Jesus or not? I'm asking, what's your eternal destiny? I'm asking, who are you following right now? So yes or no? And if you can't say yes right now, but you want to talk about it, I'd love to talk with you about it. We have people in here that would love to talk with you about it. We're not going to manipulate you. We're not going to try to convince you. We're going to lay out what we believe to be the truth and let you decide and respect the decisions that you make. But we'd love to talk to you about it. All right. Question 1, are you a follower of Jesus? Question 2, since you came to that realization, if you answered question 1 yes, since you came to that realization, have you been baptized? Have you publicly professed your faith? Have you put the ring on? Now notice, since you've come to that realization, whether you became a Christian in a dramatic kind of Damascus Road environment, or maybe you just grew up here and one day figured out, you know what, I am a believer. Either way, since that moment, has there been a time since you've been a young adult or an adult in which you have now publicly proclaimed, this is who I am? And we do it by immersion here. I can explain to you why later, but if you were from a tradition where you were sprinkled, so be it. I'm not talking about the style in which it was done. Has that event taken place? Now notice what I'm not talking about. I didn't say, as an infant, were you baptized? I get it. I appreciate it. That's why we do baby dedications. But that's a different thing. We believe and we understand Jesus taught that once you become a follower of Jesus, you signify that in a public proclamation now by being baptized. Have you or have you not? And if you answer question 1, yes, and question 2, no, when are you going to change that? We can change it next week. I mean, we could change it right now. The water's warm, but chances are you didn't bring a change of clothes, and I tee off in an hour. And so, I mean, I'll delay it for you. I'll delay, but we can also do it next week, right? If it's yes, I'm a follower, but no, I haven't been baptized, well, what's the sticking point here? If we need to make it more clear how Jesus taught, we'll be more than happy to lay that before you, but I don't know anybody that really doubts it, to be honest with you. Jesus said, once you follow me, you need to be baptized. And so here's the thing. If you can't be obedient in that, and I'm not pushing aside as though it's easy. I know it's uncomfortable to be on stage, and now you're wet on stage. I mean, that's awkward alone enough. You don't know if I'm going to pull you up or not. You don't trust me if I might drown you. I get all that. But if you can't be obedient in this, do you honestly think you're going to follow him when your life falls apart? If you can't be obedient in this, do you honestly think that you're going to stand strong in your faith when another person needs forgiveness and you don't want to give it to them? This isn't that difficult. If you're a follower of Jesus, you need to follow that up with baptism, obedience to what he has done. Proclaim to others and confirm it to yourself. Question 1, are you a follower of Jesus? Question 2, since then, have you been baptized? Question 3, are you growing in the knowledge and application of your faith? Are you growing? Now, the first 2 were real easy. Yes, no. Yes or no, yes or no. You can answer those like easy. Matter of fact, if you have to doubt the first 2, chances are the answer's no. But this third one's a little bit more murky. Am I growing in the application and knowledge? Well, I should have read more. I should have learned more. I get that. Now, I'm not asking, are you at a 10? I'm not asking you to rate yourself by a number. But which direction are you headed? Are you growing toward Jesus or growing away from him? And if you say you're standing still, no, you're not, you're going away. You don't drift toward Jesus. And you don't really set anchor and stay where you are. You're either drifting away from him, running away from him, or you're growing toward him. Which one is it? To be a disciple, it means you're growing toward him. Now, it's possible to answer yes to the first question and yes to the second question, and now no to the third question, and you can still be a Christian. You're just a disobedient one. And now it's time to get right. If you're truly following him, if your baptism was real in what you're doing, once you recognize that you're not growing in the knowledge and application of who he is, you feel conviction for that, and a Christian responds by obeying, by making it right. And we can help you with that. We can assist you with that. We can place you in a discipleship group with 4 or 5 other people who are in the same boat as you are, who don't know very little about the Bible, and y'all can begin to read through the Bible and figure out, what is Jesus saying? How do we apply that to our lives? It's literally that simple. It's a complex problem overall, I know, but it really is that simple. I'm going to read more and apply more, and I'm going to need help to do it. Are you growing in the knowledge and application of who Jesus is in your life? If the answer is no, change that. We can get you involved in a small group. We can get you involved in a home group, in a discipleship group. Take some action after this service. Text me, tweet me, Facebook me, Google Plus me, whatever it takes. Get a hold of me in some way to change that so you can take a step toward Jesus and make 2019 a different year. Question number 4. Are you assisting others to become disciples? We were on such a roll, Kevin. Am I a follower? Yes. Have I been baptized? Yes. Am I growing? Not as much as I should, but I'm in a home group. I'm in a discipleship group. I'm doing pretty well. Are you assisting others? Why is it that so many people hesitate here? So many people can easily answer question 1, easily answer question 2, kind of struggle a little bit more with 3, but come to terms with it, maybe do better. But when we get to question 4, people are like, It's because we bought into this social contract that faith is just a personal preference. And we don't really want to obey Jesus. And Jesus says to live a public faith, so I'm going to like this on Facebook, and I'm going to forward Kevin's faith articles. I'm not going to read them, but I'm going to like them so everybody will see that I'm a follower of Jesus. You read the sex articles. You don't read the faith articles, I know. I see the numbers. You don't share the sex articles. That's a whole different story because your mom might see. I'm going to do these outward activities to appear like a Christian. But when my friend is struggling, I'm not going to dare say, hey, have you ever thought that maybe it's because you're making some bad choices here? When my friend is about to step out on her husband, I don't have the courage to say, hey, this is not right. When somebody is over here who's longing for significance in life and can't understand why they can't find it, you don't have the courage to say, hey, I've been there. And I'm not perfect here, but here's kind of what I'm learning. And here's what God has done for me. You see, we bought in this societal contract that you keep your faith personal. As long as you keep your faith personal, I'll keep my faith personal, and we'll be friends. But notice what that actually is. Notice how that's an idolization of self. You know what our problem is? We are so afraid of our friends and our families and our coworkers and strangers judging us as being judgmental or arrogant. And we care more about our reputation and how they view us than we do their actual lives and eternity. And whenever I say we, I'm not doing the pastoral we as in this is really your problem, I'm just making you feel better. I'm doing the we as in I might be the bigger offender of this of anybody. That I am so afraid of being viewed like the typical preacher that people suddenly become afraid to play golf with me or go to lunch with me or sit by me in stands or be my friends because they know here comes the faith talk. And so I don't want to be that. And so the next thing you know, I care more about how others view me than I do about them. And in reality, what's happening is I'm loving me more than I'm loving them. And for a lot of us in this room, that's the problem. We keep our faith private because we don't want to be those people. Don't forget these 11 disciples, 10 out of the 11 were martyred. The only reason John wasn't martyred is because he was exiled into isolation. They were willing to cross the line of the societal agreement because they loved people. Now, some of us don't want to share because we think, well, we don't want to be hypocrites. If I start telling people about Jesus, they know what I've done. And they'll say, how dare you talk about this? You've done this, and this. And we're afraid to be called hypocrites. And rightfully so. We need to live lives that honor Jesus and align with our values. But notice, our fear of being called a hypocrite in many ways shows our ignorance of the true message of Christianity. Whenever I'm sharing my faith, I'm not saying, I've got my life all together, you need to be like me. Whenever I'm sharing my faith I'm saying, listen to what Jesus can do for us. And whenever they point out, but who are you to say that? You've done this. And you go, I know, and he loves me anyway. And you don't even know the really bad stuff I did. If you're fearing of being called out to be a hypocrite for how you're living and the message you're preaching, chances are you're preaching the wrong message. The message is about the goodness of how God saves sinners like us. And so whenever somebody begins to point out your flaws and your mistakes, that is actually a confirmation of the gospel I'm proclaiming. If you know everything I've ever done wrong in my life, I can say to that, see, I know. Isn't it true? Jesus loves me anyway. Now, for a lot of us, we're quiet here because we're afraid that we don't know all the answers. And so what about the lost person in Africa that never hears? Are they going to heaven or hell? Or if this is true, then what about this? And we're afraid that we're going to get caught into a discussion where we're not going to be able to know the answer. And that's real. And in part, that's why we need to be growing and applying and understanding our faith. But on the other hand, we don't have to know all the answers. We trust that God's at work in the midst of it. And in the midst of our ignorance, we can say, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. I know some smart people at church. We can try to figure it out. But that doesn't hinder what we're talking about here, which is, what do you believe? And here's what I have seen. But in the end, a lot of us just don't talk about Jesus because he's really not doing anything in our lives. We talk about good things in our lives. Is there anybody in this room? Anybody in this room that doubted whether or not I'd bring up the Cowboys today? Anybody? Nobody. Is there anybody in this room that doubts if a nice meal is cooked at my home this week that Jenny will Instagram it? Is there anybody that doubts it? It's not an official meal until it's Instagrammed, until you know what it is. Whenever we go to a nice restaurant, what happens? We tell other people about it. Whenever we see a good movie, what happens? We tell other people about it. When great things happen in our lives, we tell other people about it. Has anybody in this room ever had a grandchild and not carried a picture with that child around and told all the coworkers? Well, maybe, but that's I just realized there is a breakdown in that story just a little bit. You'll figure that joke out later. Okay, but generally speaking, we're very proud of good things that when good things happen to us, we tell other people. For a good number of us, the reason that we don't tell other people about faith is Jesus isn't working in our lives at all. And it's not that he's not working, it's that we have become blind to what he is actually doing. And the way for us to start sharing our faith is for us to start experiencing Jesus more. And so if you'll read a little bit more with some friends to help you, and you'll begin to apply it. And you maybe start every day with, all right, Jesus, reveal yourself to me. Reveal how I can join you today in your work. You just start using those little language, it's amazing how people will begin to pop up in your life. And you'll be able to begin to share your faith. Not everybody will accept it, not everybody will understand it, but far more than you realize. You know, Lifeway Christian Group did a survey of unchurched people in America. And they just asked the question, if a friend or family member invited you to church, would you be likely to attend? 82% said yes. 8 out of 10 of the people that you know that aren't in church this morning, 8 out of 10 said if a friend or family member would invite them, they would be likely to attend. Who'd you invite today? Who have you told about? What has God done in your life this week that just made a difference? You know, it's a funny thing about Jesus. He calls us to be disciples. And one of the ways that he changes our hearts is that he allows us to begin to impact other people. And as he uses us to impact other people, so oftentimes the greatest change that takes place is the change that takes place in us. We have one task as a follower of Jesus, as a church family, and that is to make disciples. And if we will do that, everything else will either become easy or unnecessary.